Hey everybody, my name is Stacy Croft and I am the lead pastor for our Music Row location of Christ Presbyterian Church. I am coming to you with the recording for our teaching on the emotionally healthy leader. And I am teaching this book to you really by Zoom or whatever medium that, not Zoom, but this recording you're seeing. As it's hard though, because this is a book that I find that we need to interact with a lot more. And I would love at some point for you to interact with the concepts of this book, because it really deals with what's assessment, self-assessment, what's in us, what we really need, and would love for you to do that with someone. So take the time at some point, whether you do it with people from the group, people you know, even email me. Love to interact with you about these things because they really go deeper to who we are. And that's why one reason I really wanted this book to be a part of our curriculum. I find it really necessary for us to understand ourselves, that it's more important for us to continue to grow in graces and character than jump into roles and just do our gifts and just kind of take care of the church and its needs. In fact, one of the greatest things I think can happen with us is we can hide from God in these positions of church leadership. And I really want to harp on that. If there's anything you take from today, is that this book is to keep us honest, to keep us aware and real, that we don't need these positions to do that. In fact, the goal of this study was for you and I to know that that's what this is really for and about. We really need it to have a relationship with the Lord. And what it means to be in spiritual leadership means we're doing that because we're in relationship with the Lord, not in lieu of and not to supplement. And because it's just us serving. So I wanted to look at this book in a couple ways. I want to break it down in 3 parts from the book. We'll talk about that. We'll take a little break, and then we'll have another video that's going to talk about what I've learned from a psychologist friend of mine who's also a teacher and therapist called the 4 Corners of Relationship that I think is incredibly valuable. So we're going to do kind of 2 sections. I don't want to belabor the book as we walk through it. I think it speaks for itself beautifully. I do want to hit some highlights from a couple sections on emotional health and then move into the second part of our kind of talk as we talk about 4 Corners of Relationship. So really, the first section asks the question about being emotionally unhealthy, and it's an assessment. And I think it's a great assessment. The assessment of 4 characteristics of an unhealthy leader. And low self-awareness, prioritize ministry over life, more activity for God than being with God, and lack of rest and work rhythm. And if there's anything in those that we need to start assessing. Now, I want to say this up front. We're going to look at this, unpack it. You should see yourself in this. You should see yourself like myself struggling with some of these things. It doesn't disqualify you. It actually means we're working to strive for these things, just as it does in anything. We're not ministry leadership doesn't exact perfection. It means you're looking at these things. You're aware and you're pursuing God's grace and growing in grace in it. So that's really the key of this whole thing is, are you growing in grace? So really, let's look at these. The first one is low self-awareness. You know, this characteristic is very, very important, especially going into some sort of ministry where you are going to be leading others and actually counseling and serving others. Because the question you want to ask is, why are you going into this? Is the question to go into ministry leadership to feel like you want to get closer to God? Is it because you want to be up front? Is it other things? You know, it's interesting when people become certain distinctions. It could be ministry. It could be therapy. Found this in therapy as well. I've heard this. Oftentimes people will go into scholastic settings and become therapists when they really are needing therapy. And so instead of realizing first they need therapy, they're pursuing a track of therapy to become one rather than receiving it. And the best therapists are those who are in therapy. Just as the best pastors are the ones who are being pastored or shepherded themselves. The best anything. You can see that in any sort of vocation or part of life, is submitting ourselves into that. So really being self-aware. Are you aware of what you're needing as you pursue and move into this role? It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean there aren't, sinful parts of that. But being aware of what you need as you're going into it and not trying to solve your needs by being in the position of this in ministry. The second thing is prioritizing ministry over life. And that this role isn't more spiritual or more important than any other parts of your life. And we shouldn't treat it that way. And I think even though we talk a big game about that, we can talk a very big game about being a deaconess, a deacon, an elder, is not going to, that doesn't mean it changes anything about that. We still sometimes can treat ministry with a priority. So we sacrifice a lot of other things for that rather than seeing it as a part of our life of serving and giving to the church. What that does is it tells us in the world that we really don't believe in the sacred secular. We believe in a sacred secular distinction, that the sacred is the church. My position here is way more holy. It's more important than my job, my family, my personal life, all these things. It is the church, sacrifice all to the church. That's not true. That's not what it's about. The church is to help lead us, to send us out. This position is not one, whether it's in a role of leadership of whatever it may be, is not one that's to separate you from anything else. It's actually to help you make sense of other things, to go to them and serve, as well as serve the church. And so we want, and I think this book is saying that you want to become a better person in your work, a better, stronger in your home, because this job doesn't take from you, this position, I say job, but position or role doesn't take from you. Yes, it will some, but it also sends you. So I think it's important. And then another one, the third one, is more activity for God than being with God. I think it necessitates that. That it is easy to have activity for God rather than spending time with Him, in a relationship with Him. Tim Keller has an article, as he does, a great one that I've referred back to over and over, called Ministry Can Be Dangerous for Your Spiritual Health. And one of the things he does in there is he puts indicators of how we can really depend on spiritual activity rather than a relationship with God. Things like you see a waning prayer life. You find your attitude becoming more irritable. Your giving goes away, or it seems different. Your compassion to those who are in need really becomes more apathetic. Indicators that start showing that we're trying to do ministry rather than be with the Lord. And the purpose of this is to be more with God, not less. The purpose of these roles isn't just to serve because, well, I might as well, I'm good up front. No. It's because you're already, and Lord willing, you are already serving in these ways. And this is just an extension of that, speaking and giving a voice and a picture to others of what it really means that the church is. And so that's really powerful. And then I think this feeds into the fourth and final assessment, which is lack of rest and work rhythm. If there's a lack of rest and work rhythm because of taking on this role, there's something missing. There should be a balance of. Balance is never going to be perfect. I think we go for balance all the time. I think that's part of the problem. But it means we have a good, healthy rhythm. That serving in a role or being an emotionally healthy leader means that we understand our being goes before our doing. Some of you have heard me talk about this a lot before. That we make sense of our being, who we are with God, goes before our doing. Before we do ministry, we are with God. This is all how Paul writes his letters. He writes his letters to the churches in the New Testament. Let's take Ephesians. The 6 chapters of Ephesians are split in half. The first 3, 1 through 3, are what are called, the first chapter is the indicative, right? The fact of who we are. The second 3, 4 through 6, are talking about the imperative. So, but he has to begin with the indicative of who we are, the fact of who we are in Christ, only to lead to what we do in Christ. Then he talks about marriage and relationships and work and those kind of things after we know the great theology of who we are in Jesus. So it's really important that we get those in order, and this is why the Bible writes it as it does. So that's the assessment, emotionally healthy assessment. I want to take a quick break just to allow yourself to take that in, and then we'll come back and look at the inner life and the outer life. And then we'll look at the four corners of relationship.